I suppose, but I again don't know that I don't think I've ever denied that. I've simply...
You've just said it's not worth it to you, which is fine. I don't think that that's a problem. And again, do I think that you're
again,
morally
I'm not
having
suggesting
a problem?
that... I'm not saying that, like... Again, I still think that holds to the false dichotomy of if it's not socially graceful, it's disrespect. Because I can absolutely not...
Else.
You
it's
can
certainly self...
I don't see... This is where I don't see there being... a coin toss between if you're not socially graceful, you're disrespectful.
Then help me understand, because to me...
Because I believe that disrespect...
That it's not worthwhile is to say that somebody else and their interaction with you isn't worthwhile. Which is a rather selfish position, I suppose.
So you would suggest that because I don't want to talk about the weather, what? What is that going to do? It's like you might call it socially graceless to cut through the triviality, but that isn't disrespectful, in my opinion. What is it then? Sure. Because you're the one who seems to think that if you're not one, you're jumping straight to the other. And I would say there is a middle ground of just apathy, I suppose.
Apathy is a good word for it, I think.
Because disrespect is an attack. To disrespect someone is to actually say, I attack your... I think it is, because I certainly don't think you can disrespect someone without meaning to. Well, I should be perhaps more careful. You can, in the sense of you can say something that is perhaps not what you mean. You can be unclear. But I mean, to disrespect someone is, I think, a volitional choice. Unless it's an accident, which is, I think, not an unintended consequence. There's perhaps a bit of wiggle room there, but I'm saying I believe that disrespect, because again, if you say something that someone else might say, oh, that I take offense to that, and then you clarify, okay, this isn't what I meant, this is what I was attempting to say this, and this isn't what I meant. I feel like if they hold on to that and say, no, you disrespected me, I would say that's them.
Well,
if you clarify your position and they hold on to the offense, that was them.
Let me ease the tension slightly.
I don't see tension.
I certainly agree that you can never own other people's offense to you when they're taking offense that really you can't own. Again, it's the idea of, as far as it depends on you, be peaceful with everybody. The way I've always interpreted that verse is, if I go, okay, on a moral level, the things that are moral, is there anything that I'm doing in setting myself up and interacting with people that could be done differently or better? And if there isn't, then they're taking offense where there's none to be had. And if they're offended, then sad. But that is what it is. So in that sense...
But none of this has anything to do with social grace. This is how it all began, is this concept of like propriety and courtesy, and it's like, these aren't virtues.
They're...
I mean, like kindness, that's a virtue, which is... perhaps tangential to courtesy, but I don't think it's inherent. It's in the same way that I don't believe being nice is a good thing.
No, I agree. And I've never said...
Being kind is a good thing, but niceness is a different thing.
I come back to the fact that I would say morality is of utmost use. Well, it is of eternal use, but I would not
Therefore, it is of singular use.
No, that I disagree with that assertion.
Everything that has value must inevitably derive from the thing with the highest value. I do hold that opinion. There are not multiple sources of value, there is one. So if anything holds value, it is by derivation.
As
value and meaning are not the same thing.
Value to things by saying
meaning and value are not the same thing. Because I don't believe that absurdism, there is an argument, I suppose, that like moral absurdism, which I've not read the literature enough to know how baked in that is to the concept, but I believe that meaning and morality are not the same thing. Life may be meaningless, but I do believe there is right and wrong.
Yeah, and I believe there's right and wrong too, but what I'm saying is not...
Which means that...
socially, you're doing something immoral. What I'm saying is socially, you're doing something that is going to cause people to interact with you in a particular way. Now,
which I have no control over.
You do, though.
Not really.
But
see, this is where the Stoic concept would say no.
That's fine.
Other people's perceptions of me are theirs 100%.
They are theirs to own, certainly, but your interactions with them are what create and what
No, their mind does that. If my mind...
off of the interactions they have with somebody, yes.
No, their mind does it.
Again, but doesn't happen in a vacuum. You can't interact with people by not talking with somebody.
I disagree fully. I believe you can have plenty meaningful interactions that don't involve talking.
Okay.
My point is that if I take the Stoic principle, which is my reaction to everything is my own, which means no one offends me, I take offense. That does reflect on everyone else that says, okay, I cannot offend you either. You take offense. You might say, well, my offense is based off of this action you performed.
If someone takes offense to you often, and there's something in your action that can change that, then to me, it's not an obligation for you to adjust, but it's certainly wisdom.
Depending on the relationship, yeah.
I would say not depending on the relationship. That's why I say there's use and value.
It depends, because I can't be everything. I cannot be all things to all people.
100% agree with that.
So you might say, okay, I in fact had this argument with a non-Stoic, saying, like, the slippery slope they portrayed of Stoicism would be to say that, like, well, if I cheat on my wife and she takes offense, it's still her choice. And I'm like, I felt a little forced into a corner, because I'm going, okay, strictly speaking, yes. But I, as someone who chooses to value the relationship, which I may or may not do in such a concept, if I value this relationship, then I do have to take into account actions I take. And I can say, you know what, I should be free to act as I want, and you'll take offense. Right. And that's your fault, and I can blame it all on you and say I've done nothing wrong.
Sure.
And that will inevitably destroy the relationship.
Sure. Could
I wash my hands of that and say, well, it wasn't my doing, it was all them?
You could, maybe.
Yes,
honestly.
On the strictest definition of my philosophy, and I suppose I must concede that on a fundamental level.
Yeah, but to get to your point...
But there is an element to which I say, okay, that then still involves my choice, because my choice is still baked in by saying, this action will have... If I can spare someone who I value an offense, am I morally obligated to do so? I think it depends, I guess, on the action being considered. But if it's a non-morally weighted action, then could I say... It
depends on the relationship. In that regard, yes.
Yeah, and so that's where I go, okay, this is not moral action, but if I know that this person will take offense to it, I can make them, say, well, it's your own offense. And I'm not wrong in doing that.
And you could do that, certainly.
But I also then have to own, because again, I believe you can have what you own, which means the response, not even the response, the effect being the degradation of the relationship.
Well, yeah, sure. I mean...
Is that still their doing? Yes. Am I still accepting it by choosing that action? I am.
Yes.
Which means...
You're owning your own actions. You're just not owning their responses.
Well, and that's where I go, okay, if this is a consequence of
effect, that's fine.
Well, and I think that's what it ultimately comes down to, is you go...
Well, okay, so
It means that I'm choosing the action and at the expense of the relationship, which I have every right to do, but I don't get to then say, the relationship, it was all... I'm trying to think of the exact wording I was using, because I felt like I had somewhat reasonably stated it. To say, it's essentially the idea that, okay, you can have whatever you're willing to own, which means I can make whatever choice I want, provided I accept the consequence.
Right.
If the consequence of that is a dissolution of a relationship that I value, I don't get to think I should have been able to make the choice without that happening, because no, they're conjoined. The choice is the consequence.
Correct.
Which means if I chose the thing and that happened, I did choose that.
Right.
Am I free to do that? Yes. Strictly speaking, I'm not necessarily, again, depending on the morality of the actions involved, I think you could say that you can act morally and allow that to happen if you're willing to lose that relationship. I think that is not a morally weighted thing, unless, the action is immoral. You just have to accept the consequence, and that's where I would say I am certainly someone who's not afraid to let a bridge burn if
You don't
if
care
the
about it.
choice is more important to me than the bridge.
Sure.
And I mean, there are times when there's obviously a moral component that says, no, by the moral standards I hold, I must
100%.
behave this way, which means this bridge will have to burn.
And in that case, I would agree with you that
but then there are also
certain
times
bridges
when
will
I say,
absolutely torch.
there are also
Yes.
times when I would say, okay, even if it's not inherently moral, there are still choices that matter to me based on the value structure I hold, which
And
may
that's
not
true to me
themselves
too.
hold. The action itself may not hold moral weight.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
But the value structure that makes that choice is to me more valuable than the relationship, depending on the
100%.
relationship.
A great example would be when I quit one of my jobs because of an issue of basically saying I prioritize the previously agreed upon hours and things of that nature for my family's sake. And that's not specifically a moral weight, but I just go, no, I'm torching this bridge. I'm sorry, this isn't something. So I agree with you there. I'm not. I think.
But see, then that's where I go. That applies in all that arithmetic applies with every choice.
It does, but again, to me,
So what have I lost other than a bridge I didn't want?
And the difference I see is, and this is where I say it does come down to you what you value, and I don't think that's a problem. What I'm saying is I tend to value keeping as many bridges as I possibly can.
But see,
And
that's
you
where I go.
say,
That's an axiom. You can't argue that is a value. That you can say I am holding that as a value. You can't say that it is a value outside of your own assessment. Because if I don't want the bridge, what do I need it around for?
Agreed. But what
you can't say you've lost something on a value level. It's like only because you value it.
Right. I can't
tell lose something I don't want.
I agree with you. So let me clarify. So you're saying I can't tell you that you've lost something. That's true. To me, it would feel like I've lost something because for me, there is value to saying, even if there are relationships I keep that are not specifically compatible in, again, the relationship with this homosexual or whatever, where I was going, okay, this is not specifically something where we see eye to eye or whatever else, but because of the fact that we were able to continue to cross that bridge in a comfortable manner that wasn't, ever required burning of the bridge, then I go, yeah, that's a worthwhile bridge to keep open.
This is precisely what I said earlier, which is that I'm not going to go hunt down people who I think aren't aligning and then say, explain yourself or be torched.
Sure.
I'm simply saying when it comes to my doorstep, it will stop there.
Right.
And I think, and that doesn't mean, if I'm interacting with you, now I'm going to start exposing all of your wrongness. It's like, no, even if it does, if I know that it's happening and it still doesn't involve me, I can still let bygones be bygones.
Yeah.
But if it's like, hey, come to my gay wedding, that's when I would
make a moral choice.
That's when you'd have to start to go.
That's true.
Now you have involved me, because before, even though I knew about it, it didn't strictly involve me, and I'm not the kind of person who says, again, I've made the comment of that joke, the whole I want all of you to look at it. I'm not truly that way,
right?
Unless you come to me with it,
right?
Then
if you ask, is this incorrect, or is this, again, it's the whole showing them the mirror thing. It's like,
yeah, I will. If you come to me, we will both face the truth.
Yeah.
If you don't want to interact with me,
I think what I was taking issue with is the idea that it's the axiom that is each action has a equal and opposite reaction. It's the idea that even in man, when I make an action, there is going to be a reaction to that. And whether or not I want it to be so, my action is a part of that equation. Now, I'm not saying that they don't have to own their own.
I certainly don't disagree, but that's just where I go, radical ownership frees you of all of this. Because I can say, okay.
Radical ownership of...
As in the consequences are the action, or
right.
are the choice.
Right.
I fully accept that.
Okay, so you're saying, again...
But hear me, I fully accept that, which means if I want to make this choice, and there's no moral weight on it, and that comes with this consequence...
You don't care, which is fine.
There will be the blind, impartial scales of going, which do I value more? I value the choice, which means, okay, I don't need this bridge.
Yeah.
The bridge is in my way.
Agreed. What I'm saying, and so let me
And I suppose some people
make
might
a
say,
slightly
how boorish, how much do you not care? And
Yeah,
that's just
let me
where I go,
rewind. Yeah, let me backpedal just a little bit. I am going to make a bit of a...
I'm not going to go around torching bridges for no reason.
Agreed, and that maybe was an unfair caricature. What I will say is that there's a bit of a stinging criticism in just saying one thing I would say...
That's, I admit, is that a lot of people nowadays find any standard like,
no, and
how do you know that it's right? And where I go, I don't care.
I don't think it's a problem.
I don't know that it's right.
What I'm saying
I don't care. Unless it's obviously wrong.
I would submit backpedaling slightly. I do think that the idea of boorishness or maybe obtuseness is a little strong. I think I would say this. The stinging criticism would be the only thing I would say is to have something that's not moral, that doesn't specifically have the same weight, in my opinion, that requires a bridge being burned. Again, and this is me, I'm not saying this is absolute truth, it's just something to consider, is that in that sense, I would say what you are doing, and I think you would admit this too, is submitting that what you are wanting is more important than a relationship, which is fine. But you're doing that with far more relationships than I would.
Well, sure, but that's where I just go, we're always doing that.
Agreed.
And again, the idea that says, you can't judge people. I can judge people however I want.
Yeah, you can. But again, the idea that you would
I have to then bear the consequences means if I go around being a jerk, am I free to do that? Yeah. Am I then free to be resentful of everyone avoiding me because of that? No, because that was my choice.
Agreed.
But do I get to be resentful of if I find myself living a lonely life because I have very few people who meet my standards? Slightly a Mr. Darcy question you could pose, and I would go, I certainly don't have the right to be resentful. I have the right to make the choice and go,
you do.
I would rather hold this standard because it aligns with the value structure I have.
Agreed.
And I accept the consequences that brings, which means that if it separates me from a lot of people, I'm not necessarily going to say that I won't care or that I won't be affected, because it's a hypothetical, who knows. I do accept the notion that says I have forfeited the right to be resentful of it because I recognize it as being the choice. But I'm not sure that it's a choice I still wouldn't make regardless.
And this is just something I'm curious about now, because I do feel like I'm understanding your argument better. To less of a pointed, response, to say if I'm a jerk, then of course I'm going to have to, be okay with the responses or the reactions of that or whatever else. The what did you call it? The ramifications of that. But to me, by definition, what deems you being that is what other people are seeing.
Sure, but that's again where I go, that's their own perception. If I feel I've acted in a way that I don't consider to be wrong and people presume that I've been wrong,
then be at peace with that.
Then I say I made my choice.
Yeah.
I stick by the choice, and if this is the consequence, it might be a sucky consequence, but it is the consequence.
But in other words, your hands are not tied. Well, no, you do, though. That's the thing. No, your hands are not tied.
No, because the evaluation of others is beyond me.
Agreed.
I might have gone into a situation thinking this is a choice that I think is correct, and I might assume of these peers that they would also agree. But if I turn out to be wrong, and they go, "Oh, suddenly I learned that all these peers do not agree with me, and they think that this choice was wrong," that's a unexpected change of circumstance, which I might think my original assessment of the arithmetic was clearly wrong, because I thought the consequence of this action would be different than it is, and that would potentially lead to a reevaluation to say, okay, now this is the new consequence. How does the new consequence bear with the previous, assessment of the value? And if it's the kind of thing where if it's people that you trust and they suddenly go, oh, hey, we think that may have been the wrong choice, then I would be far more willing to say, okay, since I trust these people, and the consequence now of this action is not everything's fine, but now people that I respect take issue, then that makes me think, okay, again, you reassess. Was the choice worth that consequence? Maybe it wasn't. Maybe because but then if it's just random people on the street, you'd go, I have no knowledge of your perception. I have no knowledge of your moral framework, which means your opinions of me aren't worth considering because the choice I still deem to be correct.
But the agency in which what I was saying was to say you have no control over it is
I have no control over other people's perceptions.
I somehow have my hands tied in this, whereas I say
no. It's the opposite. I have no control over other people's minds, so I won't try. It is the ultimate freedom to go, you may think of me as you please. Agreed. I have to bear the consequence of what you think.
Correct.
But I can't change it, which means I won't try to change it, which means I'm just going to make my choices.
See, that's where I go, it's not that I can't change it, it's that I'm choosing not to. There's an agency in that.
No, but see, that's just where I think you're not perhaps... And you may not be a Stoic to the degree that I am, and I'm not saying that morally speaking you would have to be.
I've realized that I'm not quite... I don't think I'm not in totality. I think, for the most part, Stoicism agrees with me, but I think there are certain principles that... Yes, correct. On this particular issue, I would say...
The minds of others are unsearchable. It's like...
I can agree with that statement, but again, it's not that I can't affect them. And that is the manipulative...
You can't in any way... that is definite.
I also can't in any way.
You could experiment with things that would potentially have effects, but
correct.
It's similar to
It's
similar to putting things in a box and seeing what comes out. It's like
correct.
That's not an arithmetic I'm willing to spend my time on. I'd rather work on experiments that are more logical.
Sure, and that is 100% true. What I was saying,
because I would also even say that like you can't affect everyone's mind.
Oh, 100%.
And by that, but see, the problem with that is you won't know who it is that you can't, which means you can't affect anyone's mind, in my opinion. In the analysis...
You can't affect people's minds without them allowing you to.
But that's the Stoic point, which is my point of going, I can't change your mind forcefully.
Yes, they can change it.
They can change it, and I might be able to give them arguments to change it, but...
But that's you affecting it, is what I'm saying. But
no,
I mean, maybe
I would still say it isn't. Because it's still their choice.
Agreed. And they still have the ownership of it, but you then have a participation award.
Even then, I'm not so sure I would agree, because I still would take the perception that says choice is choice and it's always of other people's.
But would they've arrived at that same choice without you?
Is that relevant?
It is relevant, because if I don't enact the action in which that not dictated, but it provoked that response. Like, for instance, when I had that conversation with this homosexual friend, it's like, so there was a response that was received after that in various conversations where he said, well, I'm thinking I may need to reevaluate some of those things. Would he have gotten there if no one would have had that conversation with him? I don't know.
You can't know would be what I say.
I agree, but that to me, I would much rather live my life in a way that says I'm affecting change as best I can for the good. Like, I want my voice to be able to be an agent of change for others. Now that is a very romantic statement. That is also a very what is it called?
But see, I suppose a somewhat more Old Testament view of, though, how will they know if no one has spoken to them? And once you have preached to them and they still reject it, then it is on them. And I suppose but see, that's where I go. My interaction with you is the preaching, because I'm going to say, no, this is the truth.
Sure.
You will abide by it. And at which point I have informed you. You might say, well, I haven't informed them in a very compassionate way.
I would actually agree.
And maybe they wouldn't be swayed, but at which point I go,
they've
seen it. It's up to them now.
Agreed. And there are going to be some people that actually respond better to your presentation, I suppose, of that morality, and other people that are going to respond differently to the one that I present. I actually think that that's the beauty of humans' participation in God's effort. It's like there is a truth to saying certain people are going to be struck with your level of resolve in something, unwavering resolve to say, no, this is just what it is. And they're going to go, wow, that was really, a great response. I'm going to go ahead and change my perception. There are also going to be people that go, Spencer was the first person that interacted with me in this particular way, and I'm going to, there's going to be what is the word for it? A softening, I suppose, or a not even, what's the right word for it? Inculcate. Again, it's the idea that I'm setting forth or putting groundwork in for a particular perception to take root. Sure. And I think that's a worthwhile endeavor. It's a long task, certainly. And again, as you said, it's maybe not one that
I, of course, would agree with this when you bring it in a spiritual context, but I think that same analysis does not hold in just socialness. If there is no moral weight
then
behind
it doesn't matter
things,
to you.
because the idea that, well, I have to build up rapport with this person so that if in the future a moral issue comes up, that's just where I go. That's attempting to game reality itself, and that's not a game I want to play.
And that's
because then you're saying I'm banking on the possibility that some tragedy will strike, and if I have built rapport for the past 10 years, when it happens, then I'll be able to speak.
Now, that is the tendency.
That's so many dice rolls at once that
that's
not worth the game's not worth the candle.
It's true. No, and that's true. I think that I have a propensity towards that route, but at the same time, I don't have a problem with admitting that truth. It is very true that you're trying as best you can to really affect something that's not in your power and control.
Again, that's why I redound to the Stoic. I can only control myself.
Yes, and I don't think I'm quite as staunch in saying your effect is only as far as your own.
I suppose effect and control are not the same. I would say I cannot control myself. You might be able to say that you can affect others. But even then, I think if I can control myself, so can they.
That's true, but how many people do is my problem.
But that's not my problem. That isn't my problem.
Well, and that is
if you choose not, because you are still choosing. You can't choose not to have control. Yeah, that is the choice. You had the control and you chose to give it up. Therefore, you still, in a weird way, you still have the control.
Yeah.
To abdicate it is a form of that control. Mm-hmm. Because you could, by the same token, always take it back. Mm-hmm. That is also, again, you have the control at all times. It's just whether or not you're using it. Mm-hmm. So to say how many people will view their lives in the Stoic sense, it's like, again, not my problem.
Yeah, I agree. I think for me, when I say effect, outside of the moral context or compass, I do find that the way in which I don't know that I expect to affect everybody or to bring about my own ends, but I certainly
don't.
But I certainly try to position myself in the best position possible in order to bring about the means that I desire. And that sounds... I realize how manipulative that sounds.
I take the complete opposite, which is I will live as I see fit.
Sure.
And that will be the message.
Sure. Which is what I appreciate about
you. We had this
honestly.
conversation a long time ago. Not we. I mean, it was a conversation I was a part of that was the whole notion of if you're on a deserted island and you've got this big group of people and there's a whole bunch of disagreement about what to do, how would you bring unity? And I'm like, I won't.
You won't. Yeah. No.
I will go off, and if I am right,
other people
I will begin to succeed.
Yeah.
And people will see that I'm succeeding, and then they will go, hey, clearly everybody before was just talking about what they thought.
Right.
And no one knew. Now we can see by the effects of your actions that what you were suggesting was something you knew, and now therefore you have earned our listening.
Right. Well, and this is
that's just where I go. It's not my job to convince. In that context, I could spend a whole bunch of effort saying everybody needs to listen because I have all these reasons why I'm right, and this should go. Or I could just go off and do it, and then if I'm wrong, then I'm wrong, and I fail, and I either suck it up and come crawling back, or I die.
Yeah.
And again, I've died on the altar of what I thought was right, and that's about as good as it can get.
No, I agree. Well, I think, to me, the action itself does speak. Again, that is earning you a reputation. You know what I mean? Like if you set yourself up as somebody
but again, I didn't put any effort into that.
Agreed.
Because again, a reputation is something other people hold.
Somebody else bear. I agree.
So if I could have gotten off the island and everyone still could have gone, there he goes, what a doof. And I feel like you can hold that opinion as I'm succeeding. Yeah. And it won't matter because I've succeeded.
Right.
I'm not going to look back and go, well, I thought they'd have joined me by now. I guess I
Interestingly
failed.
enough, this is
even though I'm getting off the island.
This is where I would say I think I redound to Stoicism, which is that I don't disagree that. I think some people put
I'm not sure
too
that's
much.
what redounding would mean.
No,
then.
yeah, because I don't start there. I suppose I'll say it that way.
It seems like you do start there, but when you run into the issue, you don't.
No, what I'm
you
saying,
disagreed on
what
one of
I'm
the fundamental
saying is
elements of
the notion of a reputation is some people put a lot of effort and intensity or focus into that, and I think to a detrimental end. When you are always focused on that, or you're largely focused on how is this going to be perceived, or how are others going to consider this, whatever, you're actually then cutting yourself off at the knees to act or do anything with your own agency. But if you by the act of doing something or creating a particular, path or avenue of thought or whatever it is that you're doing at the time, and that creates for you a reputation, I think that's far more genuine, organic development of reputation than to say you're somehow trying to manufacture it or drum it up.
But see, I feel like your analysis of the social grace concept is attempting to drum it up. Because it's not based off of actual action, it's based off of currying favor.
No, it's a interaction. So action is obviously something you're doing. Interaction being something that you are either saying or, body language maybe, or whatever it may be, but you are, communicating with others. In that sense, I would say on an ownership level, however you choose to interact with somebody is also going to develop.
See, this is where I suppose, come down to the concept that interaction is meaningless without substance. Interaction is not a value in and of itself. Interaction is only valuable if what we're interacting for is valuable, I guess, is my analysis.
Sure.
And I mean, some people don't say that. I'm very much the kind of person that there are very few things that I would view to be like remedied by doing them with groups. Well, if I don't like the activity, doing it with the people, then they're both, but there are people who would say, well, I don't really care about this, but if we do it in a group with a bunch of people that I like, then, then it's fine.
You know me. As much as you and I disagree maybe in our severity of isolation, I certainly am not somebody who likes groups preferably more than my own self. I mean, just sitting by myself is still, to this day, preferable to me to being in multiple groups of people. Like, that's not...
No, but see, you might say that, but then do your actions bear that out?
My actions 100% bear that out. There are times that I don't even want to hang out with my own wife.
Wanting to is not matter. Do you do it anyways?
No.
Well, but that's what I'm getting at, is this idea of I don't want to do it, but then I always end up doing it. It's like, well, then the part of you wants to do it because that means something is compelling you to, which means you want it. And again, that's the Stoic concept of nothing, you can never be compelled. Everything you do is something you wanted to do. There is no such thing as coercion. I mean, unless you are literally rendered unconscious and manipulated while you are incapable. But you cannot be arrested against... I would say you can't be arrested against your will. Because in that moment you are deciding, I can either resist arrest and die, most likely, or comply and preserve myself.
Agreed.
You might think, well, I don't want to go to jail, so I didn't want to go. I didn't want to get arrested. It's like, well, okay, you're formulating the question after the fact to make it seem that way, because the question that was really posed to you was, do you want to come with us, or do you want to die here? And you chose, I want to come with you. Now, you might then be there thinking, I don't want to be here, but you made that choice. Right. So no, there is no such thing as coercion unless you are literally rendered unconscious.
I think that there's psychological coercion, and that requires a lack of self-awareness. I think people that have more self-awareness are harder to coerce because, again, it comes back down to the idea. I mean,
that would be then you're skirting on the gray area of what I mean when I say rendered unconscious, because that could mean literally.
Wow.
I mean, to say, well, if they didn't know, and it's like, that's where I go, do they not know, or did they choose to not know?
Most people are living their lives in an unconscious state.
Well, that is a valid, it's like, okay, at that point, is someone only unaware of their conscious because they chose not to be? Or, I mean,
Well, but I'm just
I
saying,
don't know the answer to that.
threshold being, there are certainly people that their thresholds are low enough that it's just like, oh yeah, you can basically be manipulated to do whatever. I mean, like gaslighting, manipulation for many psychological, both narcissists and psychopaths and that kind of thing.
William Blake, and then you go, the fool who persists in folly will become wise. You just go, as long as you can deserve to be fooled, as long as you can be fooled, you deserve to be.
Correct.
So I suppose in that essence I go...
But again, like you said, how much agents do they really have? At that point, they are unconscious.
That's what I'm not... I'm not quite sure. This is the difficult part, as someone who does put a great deal of effort into self-reflection. I am likely biased into thinking that you always have enough knowledge to make the choice.
And I don't think most people do. I
think people abdicate. I don't think people are genuinely unaware.
100%. But that's why I say on it. There's an entire study, given sociology and psychology, that you go, people clearly can and are manipulated on a. Why is it that mob mentality is a thing? It's because most people, when they get together in groups, act a fool because they're not critically thinking, they're not self-reflecting, they're going, what is everybody doing? Let's just do that. Like, that's certainly not what I'm suggesting to do.
But a mob doesn't exist. There are only people there, and if they all left, the mob would be gone.
Agreed. But people with a singular idea that are moving after a particular agenda is, by definition, a mob. I mean, it's like...
but that mob doesn't truly exist.
It's made up of...
In the sense that if you're part of a mob and you don't agree, and you go along with it, you agree.
Agreed.
Because otherwise, again, you'd leave the island on your own if you needed to.
Agreed.
Because this idea of like, well, I was just caught up. It's like, no, you made that choice.
Agreed.
So the 100%. Mob doesn't exist. Because it is nonetheless, it's people making the choice. And the fact that they all happen to make the same choice, it's like, it doesn't matter if they didn't think about it. It was their fault for not thinking about it.
I'm not saying that you use it as an excuse. What I'm saying is, sociologically and psychologically, people can and are affected and manipulated by the actions and words of others. That is a statistical fact.
Sure, but see, this is where I think control is still yours.
Only in so much as you own it.
No, it's always yours. Whether you own it or not, it was yours.
It was yours to
abdicate is yours. No. To
To
abdicate is still you, and to reclaim is still you. At any point, you can abdicate, and at any point, you can reclaim.
So, in your
you
opinion,
never are without
people
control.
That are manipulated, in your opinion,
unless you're going to start going with the realm of like. Someone who is of so low in IQ that they are incapable. I mean, at that point, they would be literally legally insane.
No, I'm not. Yeah, what I'm saying
anyone who is
like
not legally
that
insane,
has as much agency as you or I.
Whether they have self-reflection, then it's always their own choice.
Agreed. So you're saying if you have been manipulated, then it is inherently a choice you made.
At some point along the line, yes.
Because so if you were ever manipulated, you would basically drive yourself crazy, going, "I allowed for this."
Oh, I've been, yes. That's why I am the way I am. It's because I realized, I wasn't guarding that closely enough.
Well, that's sad.
And now you go, okay, now I'm aware.
I mean, I don't know that it smacks of jadedness as much as it smacks of...
wisdom, I would say.
Well,
not
wisdom.
To be self-aggrandizing, but it's like,
It's a bit self-aggrandizing.
When you get burned, you can either go, where did that fire come from? Or go, what did I do that led me here? Solzhenitsyn says this.
Yeah, that's
He's
true.
in the gulag going, I got myself here.
Yeah.
Men with guns may have put me here, but I got myself here first.
Yeah.
And that's where, and very few people are willing to do that because they go, that would crush their whole sense of life. And if that's the case,
well, again,
your sense of life deserves crushing.
Right.
Because your sense of life, if you have a sense of life that leads you to such places, it's probably not a sense of life you want.
Yeah.
So this idea that you're going to cling to it is your own folly at that point.
I think
all choice is always yours. Whether or not you're informed ahead of time, it's like, that's sad, and you can certainly be a little bit like, I mean, you're welcome to kick yourself about it if I don't think that will fix it, but I mean, you can. I'm not going to tell you that you can't be upset that you got yourself where you are, but you can't blame other people, surely.
Sure. Yeah, no, I don't think that we're somehow in
I think the ultimate
that
thing that it
there's
comes down to is that you just enjoy social games.
I do.
And I don't. And that's what this comes down to, is on the moral level we can discard all of that. You actually, regardless of whether or not you're going to like save someone, I don't,
or succeed.
no offense, I don't know that that's what you're thinking in the moment. I think you're just thinking, this is an interesting game, and I just go, it's not an interesting game to me. The interesting games don't involve people. In so much as you can play interesting games with people, but the people aren't the games.
What I mean is, I like board games more than I like most people.
I mean, yes. I would gladly
Sad.
I would gladly play an interesting game with a person, but I will not gladly do nothing with a person. If the idea is come on over and we'll all just sit and stare at each other, it's like, no thanks. There are people who are genuinely like, so long as I'm with company, that's good enough. Whatever we do. And I'm like, genuinely, good for you if that is how you feel. I, however, will not be guilted into not feeling the way I feel, which is, if we're not doing something I want to do, then I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
You say, oh, how selfish are you that you can't just do something you don't want to do for someone else? And it's like,
that's not what
I
I'm
can
saying.
do that. Again,
And at times,
that does come down to the evaluation of the relationship, where you go, okay, would you do something, if you're married and your wife wants to do something,
right?
Do you do it because you want to, or because, again, I still take the radical agency which says, you do want to, but not because of the thing.
It's a motivation's different, but
because you know that it will mean something to her, and that's why you want to do it. So you can't
100%.
go along. If you go along with it going, I don't want to do this, it's like
no, you do want to do it.
You did, because you did it.
Correct.
You never do things you don't want to do.
Correct.
This is again a Stoic concept that most people will say, of course that's not true, because it does. Because if I believe that, then I can't abdicate choice again. And it's like, I agree. You can't abdicate choice because you never do things you don't want to do.
Yep.
You just don't know why you want to do them yet.
Yep.
It's like, do I want to sit in traffic every day? Absolutely not by that metric. Do I want to have a job? Yes. Does my job sadly involve the traffic? As yet, yes. And that's again this notion of it was a while back when I was trying to coin the concept of like the Schrodinger's choice, where people think once the myriad of possible outcomes collapses into the actuality, I then wish for a different outcome that is gone, and I think that it's somehow not gone when in reality it is. Mm-hmm. Can I have this job without this commute? No. But I can think in an imaginary sense of having this job without the commute. Yeah, that existed before the choice was made, maybe. But you looked at the cat, the choice collapsed into one, and that's what you have.
Cat's dead.
The job without the commute is gone. That was a possibility that disappeared. And so you only do a disservice to yourself by clinging to it when it's the what do you call it? The plurality collapsed and it's now the one. You have your unity. And you don't holding on to the plurality when you've already got the unity. It's like, well, that's your own problem at this point. Do I want the commute? Sadly, I have to accept by roundabout means. And some people might think, oh, now that's just you trying to play mental gymnastics to convince yourself of something. It's like, on a sense, but you're playing mental gymnastics too.
Yeah, exactly. It's a way of perceiving reality. It's interestingly enough, I actually remain in that environment of plurality, not often, but I find myself.
Well, you can't.
No,
but I was just saying. So if you are, you probably are not.
What I'm meaning, like for
yourself
instance, this
any
is a
favors.
great example. I have multiple projects that I don't start. Why? Because I have so many ideas of what it possibly could be that I just go the notion of multiple potentials is more comforting to me than the actual action of beginning.
Well, you may think that.
I'm not saying it's more valid. In fact,
I would ultimately
valid.
say that eventually you'll reach the end with an with a nothing and go.
Sure, that's true.
Then the unity will never arise.
Agreed. Yeah.
At which point I go, I'd rather had the unity than the plethora, because the plethora will also eventually go away.
Yeah.
Or I suppose not exactly. The plethora will redound to the unity, which is nothing.
Right.
Because that was always one of the options, was that nothing would happen.
That's true.